Black Myth Wukong. The game with monkeys is a game where you venture through lands defeating bosses and enemies as you go. The game is about you, the Destined One, collecting all the relics of Sun Wukong the Great Sage to bring him back, and so you go through multiple lands battling through enemies and bosses to do this. Today, instead of a normal peaceful run in Black Myth, we are going to make this intense. We are going to become doppelgangers and only use transformations as our magic in this game. Why am I doing this? Yo man, do you think I could beat Black Myth Wukong?
Bro, hell nah, that game is way too hard for you.
Oh nah, I'm gonna get you for that. Since he said this, I'm not only gonna beat the game, but I'm gonna beat it with only transformations to prove him wrong. Let's get started. In the beginning, I played the intro, which I did like normal, where you fight Erlang Shen. It doesn't really matter whether or not you use spells or not, because you can't really lose in this fight. After ending the cutscene, the real game begins. Starting the game, I ventured through the Green Mountain and killed wolves and the Raven, but almost lost to the Raven. I fought the Bull Vanguard, which is the first chief of the world, and he was a pretty easy fight to win. He was quite slow moving, and with some combos I managed to beat him. I went past the One Ring White because it was too hard, and I wanted to unlock it later since I didn't think I'd really need it. After doing this, I made my way into the boss that will give me my first transformation, which is Guangxi. This boss is a wolf, which uses fire, and he's quite fast and rushes around the stage, which sets you on fire and does unnecessary amounts of gymnastics in our fight. It took me a few tries to beat him as his pattern was quite weird for me, and some moves came out of nowhere. With some eventual hustling, I took him down, which unlocked my first transformation. This transformation will be useful for later, because it allows me to set enemies on fire and blitz right past them with really fast heavy attacks. After beating him, I made my way to the next boss, which is the Ling Zushi. This boss is a huge wolf, who is really fast, agile, and also surprisingly pretty weak. This creature did have an annoying habit of sitting on top of the shrines and jumping down, but overall its attacks were pretty easy to dodge, and I beat it on the first try. Oh, that was easy. After beating the Ling Zushi, we unlocked the Jade Lotus Pill, which boosts my maximum health massively, which is a lifesaver, especially since I put all my talent points into health. After wiping out the wolf part of this world, I moved on to the Snake Trail, which as you guess, has a lot of annoying snakes. I started the Snake Trail by immediately running into a snake and realized that these things have a lot of health. These creatures aren't that skilled at fighting though, and I managed to end them all. I made my way onto the frog next, and this frog has a pretty weird attack pool, but with some slapping him with my stick I managed to wipe him out pretty easily. After making it through the jungle part of the Snake Trail, I made my way to the next boss, which is the Guangmu. This boss uses sorcery, snakes, and magic to try to beat you, and also breathes on you with disgusting breath. With some tries, I eventually managed to beat him.
Boys, keep him.
Oh my goodness. Which means that I can use a spirit to transform into him, and poison enemies with his snakes. After meeting the monkey, who can give me better healing options, I made my way to my next boss, who is the White Clad Noble. Now this fight here was one of my most difficult fights. The issue here was his annoying attack pattern, fast attack speed and unpredictable attacks. I learnt his patterns after playing this boss for a while, and it was tricky, but then I finally managed to whittle his health bar down until he finally collapsed. Only to realize he had a second phase. This annoyed me and it took quite a while to overcome this second phase because he was so low to the floor, and his movement and attacks were really weird. I don't really know how to explain it, they were just weird. Eventually, with some holding out and determination, I managed to finish him off. After beating him, he told me he was actually cool and just simply had to defend this swamp as an order, which is crazy because he beat me up way too many times. After moving on, we entered the cave and took out multiple enemies and found the Black Wind King. This boss is a really buff man who looks like The Rock, who swings his attacks at you and can turn into wind. This boss was pretty simple, and some patience and timing I managed to beat him on the third try. After beating him, this coward decided to run away and told me to fight him at the summit of the mountain, which is crazy because he looked insanely cold before. After climbing up the mountain, I made my way to the final boss of the world, the Black Myth. This is of course the final boss of this chapter and this video, and it felt like a final boss to me. This boss took an insane 1 hour to beat, which is crazy because all the other bosses took like 5 minutes except for the White Cloud movie. The issue with this boss fight is that he can sometimes surprise you with really quick attacks for a bear of that size. But the main issue was when he slammed into the floor, turns the whole stage into a Mario vs Bowser stage, and turns into a fiery wind. This is hard because I kept mistiming the wind attacks from him when he charges into you. Eventually, with some struggle, I made it onto this run right here.
Oh, let's go!
After taking him down, I was extremely relieved after a well-earned victory. He gave me the relic that we were looking for in this chapter, and this marks the end of this part. But now it's time to continue where we left off in chapter 2. Starting off chapter 2, we start off in the desert with tons of arrows shot into the Destined One's chest. This guy with a guitar also appears and starts rapping for some reason, and then heals us, which starts off the beginning of the chapter. After beating up some low tier enemies, I fought a big electric frog. Even though this boss looked weak and fragile, I somehow lost to it a few times.
You are trash!
Eventually though, I managed to take down this freaky frog. After beating the frog, I went to this wolf guy and told him I beat the frog, and he thanked me by becoming one of the most useful characters in the game so far. Thank you, Mr. Wolfman. He allows me to buy or make medicines, which will make fights much easier. Then we made our way to the Rat Prince to fight with these 2 rats. This fight felt pretty hard but easy at the same time, which was weird because he kept comboing me, but I never died, and eventually the Rat Prince got clapped. After beating the rats, I made my way to the Stone Vanguard, which is a huge pile of stones that keep slamming the floor and sometimes sends rock minions towards you. This fight took some adaptation to beat, but eventually after some attempts I managed to take him out of commission. After beating the Stone Vanguard, I fought the Rat Prince again, and this time he was a giant rat. It still didn't stop me from utterly destroying this huge ugly rat though.
I am better!
Now that boss was easy, but now I'm onto a boss that might not be as easy. Entering the Temple of the Crouching Tiger, I found this menace right here, the Tiger Vanguard.
Oh no!
This tiger has been known for being quite difficult for a lot of players, so I was petrified before I came into the ring with him, so I knew I had to be careful. My first attempt at this boss went exactly how you thought it would go. Yeah. The issue with this boss is how aggressive the boss is. This guy really uses his cat skills to pounce and pummel you with multiple attacks. He can also turn into stone and dash straight towards you, which is the Black Myth equivalent of a FNAF jump scare. We haven't even started talking about his sword attacks yet though, where he swings his sword around and deals ungodly amounts of damage. After a lot of time spent on this boss, I eventually locked in and powered through, took him out. Unfortunately, the recording of course had to crash after I beat him, due to a network error, so I lost the recording with the attempt, which is really unfortunate. This wouldn't even be the hardest boss in the chapter though, as we made our way to this menace right here. This guy right here is the Yellow Wind Sage, and a lot of people, and I mean a lot of people, complain about this rat right here. This boss has some incredibly annoying combos and phases, and he can literally put you in cutscene combos like Mortal Kombat if you let him. I came into the boss not knowing what to do, and it showed. Eventually though, after a lot of struggle against this rat, I managed to finally beat him. Unfortunately, with my luck, of course the time where I actually win against him, my footage is pretty much stop motion. After I earned this relic from him and finished the chapter off, this allows us to move on to chapter 3. Starting chapter 3, I wandered through the Snow Realm and encountered this monkey right here, called the Macaque Chief. He awakens some enemies and runs away for some reason. After running after him, we catch up to him and fight him. This boss was surprisingly difficult for me for some reason, but I still managed to take him out. After beating him, I turn into a rat where I find this child with gigantic ears, and he throws out his sack and guess what comes out? a dragon.
What the hell is even that?
This boss is called Kanjing Wong, and it's extremely annoying to beat. This boss uses lightning, its own tail, and can even bite you. After some back and forward struggle on this boss, I eventually pulled through and took this dragon out. After taking it out, I fell into the ice and I encountered the macaque chief again, who stabs us, and we woke up in the pagoda realm. After waking up, we get up and run through the entire pagoda realm. After reaching the temple, I encountered Captain Wise Voice. This boss is some weird deer, I don't even know, that can use lasers and puts on discos and light shows to try to beat you. After some time, I eventually managed to beat him by realizing that you can actually just stay under him and you won't have to deal with most of his laser attacks. After beating him, I took on the macaque chief once again. I had a hard time trying to beat him this time for some reason, but after a few times, I took him down. After doing this, I ran over to these huge symbols, where we found someone inside the symbols talking and a woman talking to him. After she realizes we're here, we start fighting. This woman is the dragon we fought earlier, but she's nowhere near as difficult as the dragon fight. Eventually, after a few tries, I managed to take her out and used her to open up the golden symbols, which revealed Zhu Weijie inside. This boar will be our sidekick, and we continue the journey with him on our side. After this, we encounter the non-white, who can block attacks and freeze us. After taking him out, he disappears and we find him again and take him on for real this time. A lot of people I've seen find this boss quite easy, but for some reason for me, I had an unnatural amount of difficulty against this guy. After eventually beating him, we move on with the Thunderclap Temple, where I encounter another one of those freaky captain guys. This guy is pretty annoying, but with some patience in his attacks, I took him out, and we made our way to the final boss in the game. This boss is a giant man who proclaims himself Buddha. This boss starts off quite easy, and just slowly swings his giant electric mace around, although I did somehow die a few times.
You are trash!
After beating this, I get pulled into a soul-sucking sack where I find Zhu Weijie and the macaque chief. With the help of my boyfriend, I take him out and turn into him as I run through Yellowbrow's temple. After running enough, Yellowbrow turns up to try to kill me, and we enter his final phase. He starts off with turning golden after I hit him a bit, which means that I need to break him out by using heavy attacks. Now I'm not gonna lie, this boss is kinda vile, and it took a long time to beat him, especially since he puts you in which from my knowledge are two unavoidable cutscene attacks. Eventually, after some intense struggling and battling, I finally took him down. After this, he starts running, but falls into the lake, in which a giant fish comes out of the lake and gives us the relic that Yellowbrow was holding, ending chapter 2 and chapter 3 with only transformations. And so we begin in chapter 4 of the game. I kicked off chapter 4 by running into this village here with Zhu Weijie, my pig sidekick, as we battle some enemies here. This sets up the main theme for this chapter, which is bugs. Now, before we went to continue the journey in Bugland, I took a quick detour to unlock a transformation that I thought would help me out on my journey. After completing a quest line with Old Long, I unlock a map that lets me enter the Ruyi village, which is where I find this blacksmith here, who looks pretty harmless, right? Wrong. I chose to challenge him because it gives you some good rewards, and the battle has begun. This boss is really aggressive and hits really damn hard if you even blink your eyes for too long. I wish I was joking. Combine this with insane amounts of weird patterns and combos that sweep you off your feet, and you have one of the hardest bosses in the game. I am not lying when I said I went to search for some tutorials on this guy, which is the first time I've ever done this in this game. I was thinking of giving up, but then this happened. After finally taking the Yin target out, we unlock his transformation, Ebb and Flow, which hits really hard and absolutely destroys lesser enemies. Now we come back to the village as pig-looking things and meet this woman who looks quite innocent, except she's actually a spider, and so this starts up the fight. I thought this boss would be quite hard, but honestly, with some holding out against this spider, I eventually took her out. After beating her, she sends a spider needle thing into Zhubaizhe, which corrupts him and he runs away. After beating this, I enter the hollow, which is where the spider comes back and does something with me.
Help me!
After this, we awaken in the depths, and this place is actually an absolute nightmare. After wandering through the zone, we find the centipede guy, who rolls around like a Beyblade. We easily clean this centipede off. After this, we find something even freakier than the centipede, which is the Buddha's right hand. We find this monstrosity and kill it quite easily, although it looks really disgusting.
Brother,
After venturing through this nightmare hollow, we find our pig sidekick finally, although he's actually our enemy now. After beating some sense into him, he runs away and we chase behind him. After this, we fight him again, and this time he's in the mud. Phase 1 of this boss is pretty easy because it's the same as the last phase, but then it puts me into a fight with his boar form, which took me a while to learn. After being Zhubaizhe, he finally comes back to reality, only to be taken away once again. After this, we find this old woman right here, who wants to eat our pig friend up.
I beg your pardon?
So we come in there to intervene and she turns into a giant spider. This fight is absolutely disgusting, and it actually took me quite a while to beat this big spider. After some trialing and failing, I took this big spider out. After beating the violet spider, thousands of spiders come into the cave, which is insane. After running through enough, I fall down, but are saved by the spider that fought me. After running through this giant sunny temple with really annoying enemies, I found this freak here, who betrays the spiders and becomes this giant centipede monstrosity.
What the hell is even that?
Now, when I say this boss was difficult, I mean this boss is insanely difficult. I definitely spent at least 5 hours on this boss. The issue with this boss is the second phase, which is really hard to beat because he turns the stage so yellow you'd think it's a lemon, and then hits you with some of the most hard-hitting and hard-to-dodge attacks I've had to go up against. After some try-harding, I made my way onto this run here. Beating him ends this chapter, where we move on to chapter 5. In the beginning of this chapter, we pull up into this rocky place and fight all of these enemies with our pig sidekick. After this, I venture through and find the Pale Act Stalwart, who is this big bull looking guy. But after I beat him, we settled our differences and moved on. I find this weird cart thing called the Brown Iron Cart that just slams to the floor and breathes fire. After taking him out, I fought the Father of Stones, which was pretty easy, and we found our next cart to fight against again. This cart works exactly the same as the first one, so I'll just skip over talking about this. After running through the insides of the mountain, I fight the Misty Cloud and Cloudy Mist. This boss was annoying, but with some locking in, I managed to beat them. After taking out those two, I made my way to this cutscene, where Zhubaizhe catfishes this man, and we come to join him to fight this boss, who is the Keeper of the Mountains. Looking at the boss design, I thought this would be really hard, but I found it pretty easy. After taking him down, he goes to phase 2, where he summons the Yin Yang fish, and I beat the fish up pretty easily too. After this, I make my way to the Bull King, where his daughter is talking to him. The Bull King thinks something is up and calls out the daughter for being fake, in which she transforms into this ugly little fire kid called Redboy. He turns around and goes to begin fighting me. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I was not used to anything like this boss before, and his patterns and fire abilities had me on edge the whole time. Unfortunately, when I beat this boss, I didn't have it on recording, but after this, he steals the relic that the Bull King was going to give to me, and turns into the Yaksha King, and definitely has a glow up. This boss is really fast and has a lot of health, but he was one of the most fun bosses I've ever fought. Unfortunately, I forgot to record again, which made me pretty depressed. After I beat him, he kills himself, and we beat chapter 5. And now, after all of this effort and tiring work, taking these bosses going from chapter 1 to 5, we finally make our way to chapter 6, which is the final one of the game. We start off the chapter by making it to Mount Huagro, which is where we originally started off in the intro of this game, and fight some Imperial guards while making our way up the mountain. I really do not know why the Celestial Court sends such fodder at us though.
You are trash!
Running far enough up the mountain, we find this freaky guy over here, called the Supreme Inspector. What confuses me is, how is he an inspector if his face and eyes are replaced by a red hand? This boss is actually really hard, I'm not gonna lie, because of his weird attack patterns that just honestly confuse me. This boss can fly and harness a unicycle to run me over with. This guy really thinks he looks that cool, but rolls around like a clown? Damn. The second phase is really annoying, because he puts you in a ring of fire and becomes even more powerful.
I'm better! I am better!
After some drive, power, and hours, we managed to take this boss out. Then we unlock what will be the only exception for this video, which will be the cloud, because we literally cannot progress without this. After flying through the map, we make our way to this forest looking place here, and find the cloud treading deer, which looks like the deer version of the hippogriff from Harry Potter. This deer is actually known for being pretty hard, but it wasn't really that hard for me. It was mostly just annoying because this stupid deer would just sit behind his ice tornadoes for like 10 minutes. After 5 tries, we managed to take him out, which gave us Wukong's leggings. After getting his leggings, we set out to find the helmet, which comes from this giant bug here called the Fong-tailed General. I thought this was going to be a boss, but it's actually just an interactable bug that you just need to grab to get his helmet. We grab this bug and we unlock the helmet, which gives us Wukong's majestic hair thing. After this, we make our way to the gold armored rhino, which I originally thought was almost impossible because he has thick armor and a really thick horn. But after realizing you can just spam heavy attacks onto the rhino's horn so that his armor and horn crack, I found this boss really easy. After taking this rhino out, we get his golden armor, which is absolute drip. After this, we fight the hardest boss I fought in this game so far. When I flew to the swamp here, I found Zubajer trying to catch a mantis, but the mantis goes inside him. So I turned into a fly and entered his mouth to take the emerald armed mantis out. Even though this boss looked like a normal everyday boss for me, this was so hard. The problem is his second phase. His first phase is pretty easy with pretty slow and easily guessable attacks. But then when you deal enough damage, you go into a cutscene where he becomes red and bloody and becomes an absolute nightmare. The problem with him is that he becomes insanely fast, and it felt like if you got hit once, you were almost put into an inescapable combo, and you just straight up die. I spent quite a while trying to beat this stupid boss, and eventually after some absolute locking in, I managed to finally beat him. After beating the mantis, we get Wukong's hand gear, which completes the armor set, and it's time to unlock his staff. Making my way to the cave, I find this giant staff called the Jingu Bang, and we pull it out of its place and make it my own. After that, I ventured up the mountain where we encountered more of these Imperial guards and wiped them out. Getting to the top of the mountain, I find Wukong's rock shell, where I enter it and find myself in the realm of Wukong's memories. After going on a boat ride, I managed to make my way to the end of the ride, where I found Wukong's stone shell, which I had to defeat to merge into one. This fight starts off with the stone monkey, which I found pretty easy as all he does is slam the floor and occasionally use elemental attacks on me. After taking down his first phase, he clones himself and tries to beat me, but that was pretty easy too. After beating this, he turns into a grey and old looking version of Wukong called the Great Sage's Broken Shell. This boss is much more of a threat, and I was going to realize this. This boss starts off with the first phase, which is pretty simple to beat since his health is quite low. But then we get into the second phase after a cutscene. This time he has more health and defense, and now he is faster and more aggressive. This boss was really hard and took a lot of time to beat. In some runs I made it really close to beating him, but got so excited by the thought of beating him and beating the game that I ended up choking an easy W. Finally though, I locked him and took him out for good. After this, the other Wukong collapses and all of his relics merge into me and I kneel on the floor. While I'm kneeling, the old monkey comes in and puts the crown on my head and I beat the game and the challenge. This challenge was an absolute journey and I loved every single moment of it. This game is one of my favorite games, even if some of the bosses made me want to break my monitor.
I swear.
I've never had to face so many challenges in a game, and this was a test of my limits. If you want to see my other insane experiences in this challenge, go watch my previous parts here.